Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and this is going to be covering the restoration of this vintage 1965 Mustang that my client got gifted to him by his father-in-law. As you can see, it was psychedelically painted in pretty rough shape overall. Ended up having to send this to get refinished back to the Daphne Blue that it originally was. So I was sending it to my boy Caleb over at Show Me Nitro Finishes. He used to work for MJT as well as Bloom Doom and is just a fantastic guy to work with. Definitely a master of his craft. He went with a more saturated shade of Daphne as instructed by my client to match some of the original paint that was still visible under the psychedelic painted refin. So another unfortunate thing with this was that I had discovered that the bridge pickup was completely shot. Refreshing the solder points for the ground and lead wire unfortunately did not bring it back to life. Sometimes that can work, and so this was definitely a job for the offset pickup master Curtis Novak. Ended up packing this up and sending it off to him, and when I heard it after finally having the Mustang put back together again, he just did a really brilliant job, if not making the bridge pickup of this Mustang sound even better than it was originally. So here's me just testing to see if there's any kind of reading on this pickup at all. And yeah, unfortunately, it was completely shot. Now, the condition of the frets and fretboard on this 1965 neck was really rough, particularly because you can tell that it had been crudely leveled at some point in the past, particularly on the edges. At their lowest point, they were less than 0.010 of an inch on the treble side, as well as some parts of the bass side of the fretboard, and there were also deep gouges in the fretboard as well as some of the frets, and so this thing unfortunately was going to need a full refret, and that is a bit more challenging on vintage Fender necks because whether you know it or not, Fender back in the 60s up until I believe 70s, maybe even the 80s, had installed their frets from the side. I'm not sure what kind of mechanism they used to install these frets, but one, I feel like common error that I see a lot of techs do on vintage Fenders is that they end up pulling the frets from the top, which ends up damaging the fretboard unnecessarily. So they do have to go out the same way that they came in. It's definitely more work and a bit more risky if you don't know what you're doing, but overall the results are worth the effort. As you can see, those frets had come out very cleanly with virtually no chip out. And with the fractal type fret press, the rest of the refretting process went just as expected. When doing a refret on a vintage neck, I really try to go the distance with regards to the detailing to have it match the original aesthetic, but as well as the feel. And that means a lot more work beyond just leveling and crowning. A lot of detail for me definitely goes into how I end up dressing the frets. I definitely go for more of a semi-hemispherical kind of vibe, particularly on vintage frets, to just give it that really comfortable, worn-in kind of feel. The next thing that I had to address on this neck was that crack in the headstock. Now, it wasn't shifting, but my client was concerned enough about it that I went with CA glue and clamp because CA glue was the only glue that was thin enough to actually get deep into those cracks, and the cleanup was relatively painless and seamless. Next, I had to install a new bone nut on this thing because the original nut was missing. And so it was standard procedure. I typically go with an unbleached bone nut and go for a jewel-like finish. Moving on then to the rest of the restoration, I had to open up the bridge thimble holes a bit and then hammer the original thimbles back in. The wiring on this thing was pretty rough. There were wires that were holding on by a thread taped together with electrical tape. The neck pickup switch was broken, and so that ended up having to be replaced. I needed to solder the shielding plates back together for continuity in the shielding throughout. And so, yeah, unfortunately, had to replace a switch, had to replace some wires, but, you know, for originality's sake, I put all of those original components in a little plastic baggie to put in the case for safekeeping in the case that my client decides to sell this thing at some point in the future. The rest of the wiring thankfully went just as expected. Quick tap test, putting in Curtis Novak shim, and then in went our Offset Guitars UK bridge, which is perfect for this restoration. Just putting the guitar back together, stringing it up, dialing in a perfect setup, and then refining the nut slots after checking with my StewMac nut depth gauge, and then oiling up the fretboard and final cleanup. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way everything turned out. While visually the crack on the headstock is still there, that it is completely sealed from both the top as well as the side. So that is not going to be opening up anymore. And again, the CA glue was the only glue that was thin enough to actually get deep into those cracks and hold after clamping. I ended up replacing the mastery string tree that was on here that just looked off since this didn't have a mastery bridge, and just put back the vintage string tree. Our bone nut came out really nice with a jewel-like finish. And I am really happy overall with how the fretwork turned out. I kind of go for more of not quite semi-hemispherical, but close, because I want to give the fret ends specifically that worn-in feel to match this vintage neck. Additionally, any gouges that were in the fretboard on the top in the rosewood and also on the sides were nicely filled. As you can see, it's almost invisible. This was a really, really deep gouge that we then filled with rosewood dust from when we were planing the fretboard and re-radiusing it. And so, yeah, you no longer feel any of those from the top of the fretboard or the side. The electronics restoration work turned out great. Curtis Novak killed it on the rewinding of the broken bridge pickup that was on here. I also think my client went with the perfect choice in choosing the Offset Guitars UK bridge for this restoration, not only because it fits the aesthetic with the little grommets or dust caps that they've got here, which matches how these looked like back in the day, but it's just a brilliantly designed bridge. The little screws for the intonation here are actually mounted from the other side, so you do not get any kind of rattles or anything coming from those. And especially with guitars like Mustangs, where the string break angle behind the bridge can be a bit extreme, it has these little channels for these strings to slide over. And then on top of that, it does have a 52.5 millimeter string spacing, which keeps those high and low E strings away from slipping off the edge of the fretboard. And I was able to dial in the setup of this Mustang just perfectly. One of my favorite things about vintage Mustangs is undoubtedly the vibrato. They are unrivaled, particularly when it comes to being able to set them up for a floating type operation. So you can see you can change the pitch both up as well as down with a pretty significant range. And not only that, but the set screw that is in here has a little nylon disc, I believe, in between the set screw and the arm, which keeps it from having that metal on metal grinding, which I freaking hate. And is something I've had to do an additional mod on more modern Mustangs to rectify. And yeah, this thing just stays in tune perfectly in combination with that Offset Guitars UK bridge. I did end up adding a bit of tri-flow to where the cigar posts meet the knife edge of this vibrato plate, which helped things along even further. And the one misconception I feel like that has been, kind of spread and parroted online is that you're supposed to have the cigar be as low as possible, and that is just not true. Ideally, a well set up Mustang vibrato has it so that the cigar and also the arm are parallel with the top of the body, and that actually is what matters. Obviously, if you want a push down only kind of operation, you can set this to be lower. So checking with my Fret Guru XT here, I've got a bridge post height of about, that's roughly 6 millimeters I'm seeing. And that kind of setup on here, again, for a floating kind of vibrato, is perfectly stable, comes back in tune every single time, returns to center every single time. And so again, that goes against the conventional wisdom that the cigar needs to be set really, really low. Again, it really depends on your preference in how the dynamic vibrato on the Mustang operates. Here is a final look again at all of the fretwork and restoration work that was done on this Mustang. I think it really just plays beautifully overall, and yeah, really brought this bad boy back to life. It just looks and feels so very good, and I'm overall really proud of the work that was done here. I think my client is going to be super pleased. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, especially if you've got a, a Mustang or offset guitar restoration in your sight lines. It's definitely a bit of a process, but if you decide to embark in one restoration yourself, it's definitely a great learning experience, as well as a very rewarding one. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars setup tips.